So, Mark, even though managers complain about not having time to do manager tools one-on-ones, as soon as they start doing them, they love them and
Yep.
continue to sing their praises. Now, unfortunately, that same thing doesn't happen when it comes to feedback. Even though they know it's the second most important thing they can do,
Yep.
managers know they ought to spend 5 hours a week in one-on-ones and then maybe only spend a total of 15 minutes on feedback.
But they still don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, folks, there are plenty of good reasons for this. Well, they're not great reasons, but clearly managers think they're good enough reasons to not deliver on what is a core part of our jobs. So, we're here to talk about why and what we can do about it.
Yeah. So here's our outline. We're going to talk about all the reasons, and then with each of the reasons, we'll talk about how to address it. Because this is Manager Tools, and we give you actionable guidance. The first one, the big one, of course, is lack of trust. Second one, their own experience, managers' previous failures, lack of positive feedback, the previous boss effect, which I think we have an entire cast about, lack of briefing in advance, lack of practice as well.
Hmm. Hmm. That's absolutely. Okay, so now let's start with talking about lack of trust. This is a biggie, folks.
Yep.
The single biggest reason bosses don't give enough feedback is because their directs don't trust them enough yet. And this lack of trust, it leads to all kinds of ineffective behaviors. That is resistance from the directs, pushback, if you will, defensiveness, which we'll
Right.
cover later. There's also the previous boss effect. Again, something we'll cover later. Lack of a briefing, also covering later. And it certainly leads to defensiveness and pushback. Again, covering later.
Right. We'll
Hmm.
cover
Hmm.
defensiveness and pushback through the entire thing because that's
Yeah.
probably the behavior that causes all of these reasons to boil up.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Hmm.
So, like you said, lack of trust is number one. It's at the root of virtually all the problems that managers have about not wanting to give feedback. They don't really know it. Managers just say, "Well, I get a lot of pushback." But what they don't realize is the cause of that pushback is lack of trust.
Hmm.
Um, some of the time, it's because managers know they're not trusted enough, so they just don't want to deliver feedback. They're
Yeah.
predicting. They don't even have to get the feedback or get the defensiveness of the pushback. They just know they're going to get it, and so they don't want to deliver feedback. Um, Now, look, we managers ought to know that the role power differential between us and our directs, and if you combine that with a lack of investment in trust building, it's going to lead to much more difficult interactions.
Yeah.
In fact, the vast majority, the reason why one-on-ones are so loved, the vast majority of the inefficiencies in managers, the lack of ability to get their job done, the lack of ability to push new ideas, the lack of ability to start new programs, and so on, is because their directs don't trust them enough. And I've talked to,
Hmm.
well, how many tens, hundreds of thousands by now managers I've talked to over the last 30 years, and they don't necessarily see again the lack of trust. What they see is the
Yeah.
pushback and the defensiveness.
Yep.
And we'll talk more about how the pushback causes flavor of the month problems, which is endemic across managers all over the
Yeah, it
world.
is.
Um, and look, managers are busy with their own work.
Hmm.
Managing is harder. Companies don't teach us, right?
Yeah.
Other than manager tools, we don't know anybody who really teaches the basics of management. And so what happens is managers start withdrawing from their
Yeah.
relationship with their directs. And if you then are told by your boss, for instance, well, you need to talk to him about that, inevitably it's about something negative. Um, so managers just learn to avoid those difficult interactions. And to be
Hmm.
fair, they know they don't know. And unfortunately, a
Yeah.
lot of managers mistakenly believe when they look around the room, they see a bunch of other managers that have relatively calm and placid faces, and they think those people must know what they're doing. But trust us,
Hmm.
they don't know what they're
They don't know.
doing. And it's almost logical for the manager to
Yeah.
say, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know how to do it. And so I'm not going to do it. Even if, yes, intellectually they understand
Yeah.
this is clearly one of my top two jobs after building trust is giving performance communications. In fact, most managers don't even realize about the trust thing, and that's fine, but they still know I got to give performance communications, even
Yeah.
if it's only in an annual review, which of course is not really feedback. And one of the things we want to say here, and for the record, those of you in license who are licensees and are going to read this, this is not, it's not going to be in the show notes, is that um, managers should feel okay that they don't know. We want you
Yeah.
to forgive yourself about all these things. We're not telling you you're wrong. We understand where you are. And it's okay to feel like you don't know what you're doing because the vast majority of managers don't. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why manager tools exist to tell you some basic things you can do. And over the years, we've been able to include some other things that help you understand the why of the underlying principles that drive these things. And we need to teach you the why, even though sometimes that's not as actionable, because it gives you an understanding of the principle you're
Mm-hmm.
taking behavior on. And when you understand that and the situation is slightly different from standard because you understand the why, you know how to adjust your how.
Yeah.
And too often if you just tell somebody just do this thing, they will do it, but they will, when it comes to edge cases, not be as good
Yeah.
as it. And that's why we get into the why.
Mm-hmm.
Look, managers know, I can't imagine any manager in the world doesn't know that they're obliged, obligated to give feedback. Um, but again, as human beings, we shy away from things that are going to be
Mm-hmm.
difficult.
Yep.
And because we shy away from it, even though we know we want to protect a potential change of behavior, um, we know it will work if we knew what to do, but we don't know what
Yeah.
to
But we
do
don't
and we're
know.
afraid of
Mm-hmm.
it. And in the margins, when we have a choice of giving feedback or not giving feedback, negative feedback, we choose not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Part of that is a misunderstanding of the fundamental purpose of feedback. The vast majority of managers think that negative feedback is about pointing out the error. I had somebody in a
Mm-hmm.
recent virtual EMC tell me, well, I think my goal in giving feedback is to tell them what to do next time. And I said, no, that's not your goal. The goal in giving feedback is it's the same, whether it's positive or negative, is to encourage effective future behavior.
Yeah.
Now, any manager who thinks that I can be direct to the point of roughness or direct to the point of a little bit of anger, a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
frustration, or why did you do that? I can't believe you did that. That was not very smart. Or in a
Mm-hmm.
bad day, that was dumb. Um, if they think that's encouraging, then they're crazy. No
Yeah.
one thinks that's encouraging. But all that tells me, based on years looking at data and watching managers do their job, is that managers don't understand that the purpose of feedback is always to encourage effective future behavior. Your
Yeah.
job actually is to encourage people, to give them courage to do their jobs and skills to do their jobs well. Um, but even if you know that, managers know that if every negative
Mm-hmm.
feedback conversation is going to be a fight, they'd just rather not have it.
Yeah.
And because they don't, they know it won't lead to effective behaviors, but they secretly hope that their directs will figure it out. And like they did, because they
Right.
didn't. I mean, we'll talk about how managers have their own experience receiving feedback.
Mm-hmm.
They figure, well, I figured it out. They should be able to figure it out. It's kind of like, well, it was hard for me, so it should be hard for you,
Yeah.
right? And that's not the efficient way to run an
No,
organization.
no,
Yeah.
no, it's not. It's not. And I would say there's also a lot of managers have done this before. I mean, they might have come when they were a very new manager and they tried to have their first negative feedback conversation and the person reacted negatively.
Yeah.
So they learned a lesson. Those conversations are ones that oughtn't be had lightly. And it's the
Yeah.
wrong lesson to have learned. But this is all it's like a tangled web of information in my mind,
Yeah.
right? There are so many different things that are playing into an individual's behavior on any given day. And a
And
lot of that
complex.
has to
Yeah.
do with their past experiences around certain
Yep.
activities. For example, the receipt of feedback. So the manager learns the wrong lesson. Don't
Right.
give it because giving it will result in something
Yeah.
negative.
And
And
managers want to be liked even by
yeah,
their
they do.
directs. They want to have a good relationship with them, and they feel that as a pinch point.
Yep.
And if it pinches enough, they're just going to say, "Well, I don't want to keep doing
Yeah,
that.
that's
It's
the
not
thing.
working. It's not working for
It's
me."
not
Right?
exactly. It's not working. It's
Yeah.
not working. Exactly. Exactly.
So what this
So,
means is we have to solve for the lack of trust.
yeah, that's exactly it.
If you build trust with your directs, you'll be amazed, folks. If you're not doing one-on-ones now, you'll be amazed at the difference. That's why so many managers love them, because it just lowers
Mhm.
all the friction, uncertainty, and doubt. Not all, but the vast majority of
Much of it.
friction,
Hmm.
uncertainty, and doubt in a
Hmm.
managerial role.
Hmm.
Um, and if you solve for trust,
Yep.
negative feedback comes much more easily. And so the answer is one-on-ones. And then, as we'll also talk about,
Yeah.
positive feedback as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it, folks. Managers who know that feedback is a necessary part of their job might attempt to jump right into it when they
Sure.
first take over a team.
They know that's
And
part of the job.
yeah,
And so they
exactly.
have role power now. So why
Right.
wouldn't they do it? Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And unfortunately, that doesn't work. We
Yeah.
know, and to Mark's point, we have data about it because we tried it years ago. We tested managers who give feedback without first building one-on-ones through the, or without first building trust through the use of one-on-ones. And it was a disaster.
Yeah. In fact, I
It's a
mean, I tell
disaster.
people this all the time. Yeah. I tell people this all the time. Guys, we didn't just think this stuff up and
Yeah.
recommend it. I literally learned all this stuff in my management consulting firm, Horseman and Company, the previous version of Manager Tools before there were podcasts. And we tried. We thought, oh, we knew that giving performance communications
Hmm.
was a part of a manager's job,
Yep.
the second most valuable thing they could do based on
Hmm.
all the data we had from us and other companies. And so we said, well, we need to teach them how to give feedback. And
Yeah.
so we started practicing, and we
Hot out of the
said,
gate.
yeah, and it was horrible. Now,
Yeah.
we had tested it in small groups and it tended to go okay, but we didn't realize the connection between trust and giving feedback. We didn't realize that trust narrows the barrier that role power creates between a manager and
Yeah.
your direct. We didn't. We literally didn't know. And so when we got the data back saying, oh, that feedback model doesn't work, we're like, huh.
Hmm.
So we started digging in, and
Yeah.
directs told us over and over again, we don't care how they give it. I just don't like it. I just don't like
Hmm.
the way he's talking to me. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's reasonable. Now, to be fair, at that time, we didn't teach. We not only didn't teach, well,
Yeah.
we were learning about one-on-ones, we were teaching them, but we didn't connect one-on-ones with feedback. But we also hadn't connected the positive feedback too, about how if you give lots more positive feedback,
Yeah.
whether you use the manager tools feedback model or not, your directs will be much more open to negative
Yep.
feedback because the vast majority of things that happen in your organization are good. And if you don't recognize those, if all your boss ever does is talk to you about your mistakes, that
Hmm.
burns trust and it
Yep.
just makes things harder and harder and harder. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly
Yeah.
it. That is exactly it.
Yeah.
So in terms of the spectacular fail, I'm going to
Yeah.
say, of the attempted feedback delivery, sans a trusting relationship, we learned essentially from interviewing these directs that they couldn't keep up with the changes, and their boss was overwhelmed with the speed of change, even though they were
Yeah.
the ones who started it. That's the thing.
Yeah. Imagine your boss, for those of you who know the Trinity, one-on-one's feedback, coaching, delegation, imagine your boss going to a training and coming back and
Mhm.
doing all of them at once. It would be, well, we do know what happened. We
Yeah.
tried it and it was just
Yeah.
disaster. And it didn't occur to us until later. And you just mentioned it. When you're learning a new thing, your directs are learning it along with you. So
Yeah.
you have two learners, neither which truly understands it. They're just implementing a number of words in a certain
Hmm.
order,
Yeah.
and the directs go back to their old experience and say, "Oh, he's trying to give me negative feedback. I don't like it." It's even worse that when we first started it, we told people, "Yeah, do one-on-ones and do feedback at the same time," and
Yeah.
we didn't say first positive and then negative. Why?
Right.
Because we literally didn't know. By
Didn't
the
know.
way, at Horseman and Company, if I delivered something like that, I think we ought to do this to the client, and the client says, "Okay, Mark, we'll do it." My guys go out and train it, and it turns out to be a disaster. We don't get results in retention improvement. we didn't get paid.
Yeah.
So there was a very economic reason why we were
Hmm.
scrambling to figure out what worked and what didn't work because we wanted to get paid for the work that we're doing.
Yeah.
To be fair, we shouldn't get paid if a consulting firm, a coaching firm, a
Yeah.
training firm says we'll improve that and then it doesn't work,
Yeah.
right? You shouldn't get paid. But believe me, there were sleepless nights for us at Horseman and Company.
Mm.
Like, why is this not working?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
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 Now,
That's
look,
the thing.
you could say, look, bosses should go fast. These tools seem useful. They seem
Yeah. Oh my
intellectually
gosh. Yes.
reasonable. They're logical. They're acceptable, right? And we would agree. But if speed doesn't deliver effectiveness, then speed is not the answer. In
Hmm.
fact, Andy Holt spoke yesterday on our executive speaker series call, which is available to executive tools licensees. And one of the things she said is when you're talking to IT, Andy is a very impressive IT exec and leader at one of our client companies. She said, actually, what you don't want speed. What you want is predictability, right? So you can know when things are going to happen because then you can plan
Hmm.
around it. But man, if you try to do a lot of manager behavior changes all at
Yeah.
once, and your directs are learning along with you,
Hmm.
you not only don't get the results you want, you get unpredictability. You get lots of bad interactions.
Yeah.
And man, we had some managers, oh, I would guess out of the hundreds of thousands we trained, several thousand said, I'm never listening to any of your guidance ever again.
You led me
Because,
astray,
well,
friend.
right, you did. And in some cases, we were able to sit down with them and say, hey, look, we want another bite at that apple. We were
Yeah.
wrong. We want you to try it differently. And luckily, obviously, it wasn't luck, but luckily, obviously, it worked. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yes, when we slow things down, what we find is that results and retention increase dramatically
Yeah. Yeah.
because something I oftentimes say when we're training folks, the effective manager conference is people aren't great at change. The worst kind of change is when your manager is changing.
Yes.
So
And then
people
they're
need
expecting you to
time.
change. Yeah, they do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the people need time to receive that kind of change from, to your point earlier, Mark,
Yeah.
somebody who has a degree of role power over them.
Yeah.
They're not ready to move as quickly, even though the tools are perfectly valid. Rushing through it comes with very little, if not negative, value.
You
So
know,
don't
yeah.
do it.
Yeah, I often tell when I actually did the first two sessions of a virtual effective manager conference this week, and the next two sessions are next week. And one of the things I use as an example, I say, have you ever been sitting at your desk back when everybody was in the office and you're getting ready to write an email to one of your directs and you see them sitting there and you say, they're at their cube and you say, well, I'll just walk over and talk to them. It'll save
Yeah.
me the time of writing an email and them responding and adding to their email inbox. And so you walk over to your direct and you say, hey, you got a minute? And I ask the group, what do they almost always say? And everybody goes, yes, sure. Okay, boss. And then I say, it's not because you're awesome. They say that because you're the boss and because you
Yeah.
have role power. I tell bosses, you have a sign in their forehead that says,
Hmm.
watch out, I'm your boss. I could fire you. Um,
Hmm.
Now, I even also go further. What if I want to stick the knife in a little bit deeper? And I say, your directs don't think of you as a nice person.
Yeah.
You are a nice person, very
Yeah.
clearly.
Oh, yeah. No
I
doubt.
mean, we meet so many managers all over the world, and they're wonderful people trying so hard to do better.
Hmm.
And I like to joke that we've been downloaded at Manager Tools over 250 million times. That's a lot for something as mundane and not exciting, not sexy, not cool.
Hmm.
I mean, we're not Taylor Swift, and yet we have 250 million downloads
Yeah.
on a podcast about management, which tells you how much managers want to get
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
But the reason they don't think you're a nice person, and you are a nice person,
Yeah.
don't get us wrong, folks, is because they think of you as their boss.
Yeah.
And without trust building, again, to narrow that gap, you can never
Hmm.
eliminate the gap. You can't eliminate the role power. Your directs know that you have some power over them. And that power generally is seen as a negative to the
Yeah.
health of the psychological relationship. But
Hmm.
trust narrows the gap enormously. And
Yeah.
if you want to give feedback, especially negative feedback, where most of the pushback and defensiveness is, um, it doesn't work without the creation of trust first between the
Hmm.
manager and direct. It may
Yeah.
not be what we want tactically. It'd be better just to be able to give feedback. skip the
Yeah.
one-on-ones. You mentioned, I think, that a bit ago that a manager with 10 directs spends 5 hours in one-on-ones.
Yeah.
If he or she gave feedback, 3 or 4 pieces of feedback during that one-on-one, it wouldn't take them any time at all. But if they did
Yeah.
it outside of the one-on-one, maybe they'd spend 15 minutes a week giving feedback. Now, by the
Yeah.
way, folks, if you don't know our feedback model, I just want to say this. You can give feedback in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as, hey, can I give you some feedback? When you do that, it's a good thing. Thank you. Or, hey, can you give you some feedback? When you do that, that's not helpful. Can you work on that for me? That's all it takes. It's 10, 15 seconds. And by the way, you'll start out and it'll take you 30 seconds or 40 seconds or even a minute. But over time, getting reps, which we'll talk more about later,
Mm-hmm.
you can reduce that down to 10 seconds. And as I
Yeah.
like to ask groups, if your boss was about to give you feedback and she's trying to decide between giving you 2 minutes of feedback about a particular one topic or 15 seconds, which would you choose? And everybody's
Yeah.
like, oh, I want 15
No one
seconds.
wants two
Yeah.
minutes. No
Yeah.
one.
So it doesn't take long to do it. But unfortunately, because of lack of trust,
Mm-hmm.
you have to invest in the trust first. Again, it may
Mm-hmm.
not be what you want tactically. You want to get right to that feedback because you're responsible for performance. Your boss is holding you accountable. You want to hold your people accountable.
Yep.
But in the long run, building trust is the right thing to do strategically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
And
exactly
that
it.
means one-on-ones.
That
Yeah.
means one-on-ones.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right.
Good.
So that takes us through the trust piece. Now we're going into their own experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Bosses who deliver feedback to their directs have their own experience having received feedback.
Exactly.
All the bosses were somebody's direct at some point in time.
Yeah.
They've got that experience. And let's face it, that experience is probably uniformly terrible.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not like they've been getting such great, wonderful examples of people delivering feedback to them that you could be expected in any way to have cobbled
Even
together a
from
perfect
executives.
representation.
Even
Exactly.
from executives, you would
Yeah.
expect, oh, well, she's been promoted several times, so she must really be
Yeah.
good at this management stuff.
Yeah.
Nope.
No.
Executives actually are even worse, partly
Yeah.
because the trust differential, they're not spending time building
Right.
trust in most cases. Many of them are quite trustworthy people, but the role gap becomes so big
Yeah.
that when an executive gives negative feedback, it's scary for a
Yeah.
direct. People worry about their jobs. Like, is that the only interaction the vice president can have with me? He noticed I
Yeah.
did something wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they
Exactly.
don't do it well because they didn't
Yeah.
learn and they keep doing what they've always
Right.
done. Oof,
Exactly.
it's terrible. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And folks, we can assume that everyone's previous bosses were on average, at best, average.
Yeah,
Many of our
average.
managers were bad.
Yeah.
Let's face it, right? So, what that means in most cases is there's no one on ones happening, there's not trust building happening, there's not a delivery format that is
Right.
proven successful for the delivery of feedback. And let's face it, it usually means the word feedback is just simply a negative thing. It
Yeah. In
means
fact,
only bad
yeah.
stuff.
In fact, if you look at the popular business press, if you look at Harvard Business Review, if you look at Fortune magazine, even if you look at some of the management articles about Wall Street Journal, whenever there's an article about feedback, it
Yeah.
says feedback, but that it only mentions negative
Yeah,
feedback.
exactly.
They,
Yeah.
and I got a question from somebody the other day. It was a very good question. And she said to me, she was an HR exec and she was in one of the sessions. And she says, well, Mark, you're talking about taking notes handwritten in these one-on-ones. But there are all these tools that my company provides, digital tools, to allow us to take notes at the same time on a shared screen, and we can send in agenda items in advance. These are all bad ideas
Yeah.
for one-on-ones. And I told her, I said, look, I'm glad that there are digital tools companies
Mhm.
trying to improve the one-on-one experience. Anything we can do to make more managers give
Yeah.
one-on-ones, the better. But there are certain non-negotiable basics about one-on-ones, and shared agendas and shared note-taking are definitely not one of them. How do we know that? Because we tested it. And so I
Yeah.
actually said to her, I said, look, I'm sorry. I just disagree. I would not use a tool from a digital tool company,
Mhm.
even though it's probably beautiful, very elegant,
Oh,
works on my
yes.
phone, super, it works on any platform. And we're an iOS company here, or an Apple company. So it works on my iPad, it works on my
Yeah.
iPhone, it works on my Mac, and so on. But again, that tool was built by people who don't understand one-on-ones.
Right.
And I said, so I don't recommend any of those tools. And she was she was not happy about that. She wasn't mad. She just wasn't happy because
Mhm.
we have all these tools. Why should we use
Yeah.
those tools? Because they're not in concert with the purpose of one-on-ones, which is to
Right.
build trust. And how do we know that? Because we tested all kinds of things to try to figure out what works
Right.
best. And in that very same way, people who are talking about feedback in the popular press don't understand feedback. They think
Mm-hmm.
feedback is literally negative. And when you tell
Yeah.
them, what about positive feedback? Oh, I don't know, praise. I said, can you imagine managers going around praising people, which by the way, praise is great. We have a podcast says, yes, please praise. But imagine that the two tools I had to talk to somebody were praise and negative feedback.
Uh-huh.
Well, what happens is the negative feedback just becomes feedback. And
Yeah.
I just got some feedback
As
and
it
that's
did.
negative, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to, so as we'll talk about, one of the ways to make negative feedback easier is to give more positive
Yeah.
feedback, meaning there's only one model for giving feedback. It's just
Mm-hmm.
performance communications between a boss and her directs. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so most bosses only give negative feedback. And what
Yeah.
that means for the recipient, what does that mean? It means there's low trust. There was
Mm-hmm.
a belief that feedback was negative feedback, which kind of hollows people out. Really?
Yeah.
That's all feedback we get is negative? What about all the good things I do?
Mm-hmm.
And as we say for the average manager, no offense, nobody taught you this stuff. Forgive yourself if you've done this before.
Mm-hmm.
Rest assured, folks, I have. Everybody else at Manager Tools, before we learned this stuff, they did it the same way, which was wrong. It was delivered unprofessionally,
Mm-hmm.
and it certainly was delivered. I mean, when I tell people, deliver negative feedback with encouragement, and they just look at me shocked,
Yeah.
like, what? No, I want to correct their,
That's
I
an
want to tell them
oxymoron.
they
It
made a
makes no
mistake.
sense. Yeah.
I said,
No.
wouldn't you love a boss who had figured out a way to talk to her people in a way that said, I saw what you did, I heard what you did, I know what you did, and it wasn't great. Can you do that better next time? I believe in you, I trust you. I think you can figure this out on your own. That's encouraging. And you don't deliver it with a frown. You don't
Right.
deliver it with an
Scowl.
edge in your voice, a scowl. That's good, yeah. Um, and if it's not focused on future effectiveness,
Yeah.
directs when it comes to negative feedback will think that they're being told what they did wrong in the past about which they can do
Right.
nothing. Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
exactly. They're not time travelers. You're not a time
yes.
traveler. The only reason the organization expects you to talk about something we cannot do anything about is to have more future effective behavior, to make sure
Yes.
the future is better than the past.
Yeah.
And making people feel bad for things they cannot change doesn't do anything helpful
No.
to shape
Well,
our
many
future.
managers think so. Many
Yeah,
managers
they
think if
do.
I
I
feel
agree.
make them feel fearful about that,
Yeah.
they will avoid doing that.
Yeah.
But that is a really dark way to think
Mm.
about motivating people. That's like the high school coach who tells the kid in football or swimming or track, let me show you what you did wrong.
Yeah.
Well, according to psychologists that I used to employ at Horseman and Company, when you tell people over and over what they do wrong, their mind doesn't know whether it's right or wrong, but they get more videos of themselves doing
Yeah.
it wrong.
Doing
And
wrong.
so they have multiple reps doing it wrong.
Hmm.
And if they get into a pinch, they will do it the way their videos in
Right.
the videos in their head tell them to do, which is the wrong way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And dude, the way I think about it is when it comes to feedback and giving that negative feedback poorly, I think to myself, okay, so let's say they feel punished, which is legitimate and absolutely
Sure.
perfectly reasonable given the way many of us give the feedback. And they're in that situation next time and they know, oh my gosh, I got in so much trouble last time. Oh my gosh,
Oh,
what do I do? Oh, what do I do?
yeah.
Does anybody want their directs making decisions more slowly in the future? Because you've just
Yeah.
created analysis paralysis.
In addition, many times they won't do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And every organization I know is talking about changing,
Yeah,
changing faster, falling forward, making
yeah,
mistakes, but doing it better.
yeah.
But then you treat them in a way when they make a mistake that says, I shouldn't do
Oh,
anything,
yeah. Yeah, exactly.
right? Yeah,
I say you can make
exactly.
mistakes, but I totally
And
don't
by the
want
way,
that.
if you instill some fear in your directs, how much more creative does that make them?
Yeah,
Creative
seriously.
people aren't motivated by fear. There's a whole line about creativity that you have to make things as fearless as possible. You
Yeah,
have to give people the sense that it's okay to make a mistake.
yeah.
And so instilling fear is not going to make your people more creative. So they
Mm-hmm.
won't come up with better ways. They'll come
Exactly.
up with different, but maybe not better ways because they
Yeah, or
won't
they'll
do it.
make it your problem.
Yeah.
What do I do, boss? I don't know what to do. I can't. Yeah, great. Bring me more problems, please.
Yeah.
Love that. No,
Yeah.
we don't love
Yeah.
that. We don't love it.
Exactly.
So let's face it. Exactly. So
Yeah.
folks,
Exactly.
remember that when it comes to managers who are giving feedback, they are also previous receivers of feedback. And you might argue that what they experienced was on the receiving end and therefore should be better than what they received in the past.
Right. Why?
Argument can be made.
Why?
Yeah.
No, you're dumb. If you got feedback before from somebody higher up in this organization and you didn't like it,
Hmm.
you should know that you should do it differently.
Yeah.
But then you see that person get promoted again. Well,
Right.
apparently the organization respects that behavior.
Yeah.
They want more of that. So why wouldn't
Exactly.
I?
Why
What
wouldn't
other
I?
training or guidance do they get about how to be a boss, right? Yeah.
Exactly. It's not like the
Yeah.
organization is helping them figure it out. It's not like it's providing an alternate tool to help them be better.
Right.
So, in terms of our ability to grow as managers, it's hindered by the rewards and punishments that are happening around us. What
Yeah.
are people being rewarded for? If they're moving up the chain and they're delivering feedback badly, I have got no signal that that's the wrong way, other than the way I felt. And that's
Right.
not
Yeah.
maybe valid.
Look, the primary way organizations develop managers, and by the way, that's a gross overstatement because they don't
Hmm.
generally, is they're supposed to learn from their bosses.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't anybody assume that the way to become a boss in this organization is to engage in behaviors that existing bosses do?
Mhm.
Or I don't think there's enormous amounts of difference between manager at company A and manager at company B. So if I move from A to B after having a bad manager at A, and I see manager B at company B doing the exact same
Yeah.
things, apparently I'm okay. Now I have two examples in two
Yep.
different companies that says this is the way to do it. We
Hmm.
don't give positive feedback. We don't build trust. And when I
Hmm.
make a mistake, they're going to talk to me about my mistake, and they're
Hmm.
going to make me try to feel bad about my
Yeah.
mistake.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's
We
a
learned the
reasonable
lesson.
conclusion. Yeah.
It is absolutely reasonable. All right.
Yeah.
So the next piece then is previous failures. Folks, the vast majority of bosses have tried to give feedback. And what they received in return from their directs was a whole bunch of pushback and defensiveness. And in the worst cases, they got written up and HR was involved,
Yeah.
telling them that they can't do that again,
Yeah.
irrespective of the fact that HR is the part of the organization that probably should have been involved in developing them with training and giving them the tools that they needed to be more successful,
Yeah.
irrespective of the fact that HR ought to be siding with the manager
Yep.
and not the direct,
And by the way,
because,
right there, can
yeah,
I just interrupt?
yeah,
That
yeah,
blows people's minds. What you
I
just
know.
said blows people's minds. They think, oh no, HR is where I go to complain.
Yeah.
No,
Mhm.
HR is not the union,
No,
the unofficial union of the employees. HR
no.
acts that way frequently. And don't
Yeah.
get me wrong, folks. Don't get me wrong. We love HR. We love good HR, but we don't like bad HR. And HR that says, oh, when an employee complains, I should. Well, we just did a very popular series of podcasts on manager tools about grievances last year.
Hmm.
This is
Yeah.
2025, but it happened in 2024. We had several, I think we had 4 or 5 episode cast about
Yeah.
how to handle a grievance. And employees go to HR and HR turns it into a grievance and suddenly the manager's in trouble. Manager's in
Hmm.
trouble for doing what other managers did to her.
Yeah.
And again, what training was there? None.
None.
So all of this just leads to the overall feeling that there are a lot of reasons why negative
Yeah.
feedback is hard. There are all kinds of
All
systems and
kinds.
processes and behaviors and examples that exist to make it hard for managers. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be, but we respect the fact that if you tried it, whether you used our
Yeah.
model or not, and it was hard, it's okay.
Mhm.
All right? It was made hard, and it's not your fault.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not. The systems and processes aren't where they need to be to
Hmm.
take care of managers, to make them feel like I know what my job is now. I tell the story all the time, Sarah, of of if you're hiring a software developer, one of the interviews that every software developer goes through is they go through a technical interview, and they have to prove that they can write code. They're maybe given some pseudocode to work on so they don't have to
Yeah.
learn the language that the company uses. They're given a regression analysis to have to do because that's an important part
Hmm.
of code. Or they're given something to debug in a language that's relatively well known. And by the way, if they can't do those things, they don't get to be a software
Yeah.
developer. They don't get hired. And yet, when it comes to promoting people into management, we don't teach them any of those things that
Nope.
are fairly standard. Now, I would argue a great many companies, and this is probably heretical to say, a great many companies don't know. They literally don't know
Yeah.
what good management is. They
Mm-hmm.
don't, they've not been exposed to data that we've been exposed to and helped develop.
Mm-hmm.
They've not been exposed to the basic manager tools trinity. Um, in fact, had somebody tell me once recently, "Oh, I'm totally on board with one-on-ones. My people and I, each of my people, all 6 of my directs, I can fit them in once a quarter."
Oh, yeah. It's all on board. I hear that.
And so
Mm-hmm.
now there are hundreds,
Yeah.
thousands of people around that person who think that one-on-ones are quarterly,
Yeah.
and then they wonder why they're not getting
Yeah.
good results. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly. Exactly. So,
yeah,
folks, even if even if you're a smart manager, you learn a bad lesson given all
yeah.
of these external factors. Feedback doesn't work. And maybe this is a bad lesson to learn, but it is the lesson most new managers learn.
And
And
it's reasonable for them to learn it.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. That's exactly it. But again, they learn that lesson without understanding the critical value of the trust building up front.
right.
So even when they do, let's say, roll out the feedback model, they're hesitant, they're uncertain, they're tentative about their efforts, and many directs can sense this tentative
Right,
unsureness and still push back.
right.
And many managers have done what they should have done. Still, the scar tissue from their first failed efforts exist, and they hesitate. They talk themselves out of feedback, both positive and negative, and nothing changes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, good. Next
exactly.
one, and we've alluded to this 50 times already. Lack of positive
Yeah.
feedback.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
you read 100 articles, I said this already, about feedback, you'll notice something insidious and, frankly, in my opinion, vulgar, because I think of management as an ethical thing. You're responsible for taking care of the professional lives of other human beings. That's an ethical burden. You
Hmm.
should feel that responsibility when you become a manager. So when the places you might go on the web to find out information about how to be a manager tell you things that are fundamentally wrong, not just
Yeah.
flawed, not just mistaken or well intended, but fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
Um, it's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
It's a cancer on
Yeah.
the profession of management. When thought leaders talk about feedback, what they really mean is negative feedback.
Yeah.
Um, this is really very close to malfeasance, and they don't know. It's just like those digital tools directors, and I'm sure I'm going to get email from people saying, "I love my digital tool," and I'll say,
Yeah.
"Okay, that's
Sure.
good." It's a bit like saying, "I'm going to drive faster in the wrong direction." Yeah, you won't get to where you're going any sooner. Frankly, when it comes to direction, most managers don't know what
Yeah.
the direction of feedback is, so almost anything will work, right?
Yeah. There'll be
If you don't
incredibly
know
high
where
searchability, though.
yeah,
So,
exactly. That's great. Your SEO numbers would be
yeah. Oh my God.
fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah. The thought leaders intellectually understand that both positive and negative exist,
Hmm.
but they still say feedback
Yeah.
when what they should say is negative feedback. Well, if you're a young
Hmm.
person, if you're just starting out in your career, and every time somebody talks about feedback, they talk about negative feedback, it should be no surprise to
Yeah.
you that there's not a lot of positive feedback in the world.
Exactly.
So again, if you've thought this before and you didn't know it, it's okay. It's not your fault. The systems and processes that you went to try to become educated about your job failed you. It's
Yeah.
not your fault.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the thing, folks. What the popular guidance is saying is wrong. It's just plain wrong.
Yeah.
We know that you struggle with it and we understand it, but it's wrong to
Well,
turn feedback
well,
into only a negative.
yeah. They
Yeah.
say, well, yeah, we know you struggle with negative feedback, so we're going to give you a way to give
Right.
that. But in doing that, again, if
Yeah.
you only do that, it's just wrong. It doesn't
Right.
work. And by
Right.
the way, people try it and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And yet there are still new people out there talking about this and focusing only on negative. And
Exactly.
yeah, it's
Well,
horrible.
and it's
Yeah.
just, it's not. They should know better. The
Yes,
thing about it is the people that are saying these things are smart enough to
they're
know
smart.
better. But
Yeah.
you know what doesn't get you headlines? Remembering that there's both negative and positive feedback. And
Yeah.
if you're more interested in making headlines and getting published rather than explaining what's really happening and giving managers a professional foundation to support them in what they're doing, then talking about it negative is great. There's
Yeah.
tons of revenue in
Look,
talking about it that way.
for years, Mike and I, when it was just Mike and I 20 years ago, this 2025 is the 20th anniversary of Manager Tools. And when we first started, I, of course, had run a consulting firm, coaching and training and consulting firm on management, which is where the data comes from for Manager Tools. And the web wasn't really a big thing. Mike and I started the company in 2005. Of course, the web had existed, but SEO didn't really exist in
Yeah.
significant ways. There weren't thousands of companies selling SEO optimization, or I guess I shouldn't say that. It's because it's search engine optimization. But and so when Mike would say, it would be good if you could write some more clickbaity headlines, I had gotten
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
disenamored. I had gotten so frustrated with these other thought
Hmm.
leaders really screwing up in the
Yeah.
way they talk to managers that I didn't want to be clickbaity. I regret it now. I should have
Yeah.
done it anyway. We tried to should have been paying more
Mhm.
attention to SEO for years. And I know that Sarah, you and Kate are working to
Yeah.
correct that mistake that we made. But I just wanted to stay really far away from it because I didn't
Yeah.
want to be the rest of these
Yeah.
guys who were saying things that people wanted to hear, but not informed about
Right.
what would work and what wouldn't work.
Exactly.
That really bugged me. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the thing. I think of this the kind of the same way I think about one-on-ones. What are your purpose? If your purpose is to build an effective relationship, then there are certain other behaviors that are required in
Exactly.
order to achieve that thing. If your purpose is to help managers, then there's a certain series of behaviors that will happen
Yeah.
with that thing. And most of the people that are talking about management are teaching you to do things like the sandwich technique. Their purpose is
Oh,
not to help
oh.
you. It is not to help you. We
I
at Manager Tools are here to help you. They're
yeah,
really just not. They're
I
just
cannot
trying to get
believe I
clicks.
wrote this entire podcast and we're talking about negative feedback and I never once mentioned the sandwich
Yeah.
technique. Either that's good or bad, I'm not sure which. Yeah.
Hmm.
These hucksters
Hmm.
out there, they're not trying to help managers. They're after revenue. They're after increasing their name
Yeah.
recognition. They're trying to sell a book. And frankly, when I'm in a bad mood, it ticks me off. It really
Yeah.
does. It makes me sick to my stomach. So let's be clear. If you're a manager right now, and we're glad to have you here, the road to negative feedback can only go through positive feedback. Now, we've tried to say that a number of ways, but let's be more clear. Why is that? The fact that we have to explain this infuriates us because of all the bad guidance. The
Hmm.
reason you have to give positive feedback first is because of trust. The
Yeah.
vast majority of things that happen in your organization are good.
Yes, they
Most
are.
deadlines do get met. Most of your directs do communicate reasonably well. Most directs, all directs are trying to, actually, not most, darn near all, 99 plus
Yeah.
percent, are trying to do a good job.
Hmm.
The only reason I say not all is because I've heard some horror stories. I have
Yeah.
firsthand accounts of horror
They're
stories.
minorities, though.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
there's
but it's
very
tiny,
few.
tiny, tiny. Yeah.
Yes.
If the vast majority of behaviors in your organization weren't effective,
Hmm.
your organization would cease to exist very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
You would
all we
cease to
talk about,
exist in your
yeah,
organization. I
yeah,
use sports analogies all the time. And I always ask managers, I'm like, how do I know most of the things being done by your team are good? And they're like, well, I don't really. I'm like, okay, can I ask a different question? If the team has a really, really crappy season, what's the first thing that happens in the off season? Everyone's like, they fire the coach. I'm
yeah.
like, yeah,
Ah, oh, I've
coach.
never heard you say this. This is so good.
Congratulations, coach. They let you keep
Oh,
your job and they invested in you even further. You didn't get removed. That was the
yeah,
other option.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really good. I'm gonna use that with groups. Yeah. Look, if you define feedback as only negative, you'll be ignoring the vast majority of behaviors of your directs. That doesn't make sense to your
Hmm.
directs, and
Exactly.
it erodes trust.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you doubt that, apply the middleman test.
Hmm.
I don't know if we call it the horseman middleman test. I used to call it that. We might call it the manager tools middleman test. Ask yourself, remember, the middleman test basically says you're between your boss and your directs. Okay. So whenever you're wondering about why your directs are responding the way they are,
Hmm.
and you're not that much different than your directs, and your
Yeah, you're
boss
not.
isn't that much different than you. We're all pretty much the same around here. Diversity is good, but there's the things that make us similar are a lot more
Hmm.
common than the things that make us different. Ask yourself how you feel when your boss only points out your mistakes. Does it
Yeah.
feel good?
Mm?
I would
You like
guess
it?
not. So then why would we expect directs to feel
Right.
good when we give them negative feedback if
Right.
we haven't taken the road through positive feedback?
Hmm.
And if you only give negative, like we said before, you're going to be destroying trust. And if you haven't built up trust with the one-on-ones, you'll quickly get into a trust deficit and
Yeah.
you might as well kiss any future efforts, even if somebody recommends a great new manager tool or a process tool or a system
Hmm.
tool or a meeting tool or a digital tool. All of those things will be at risk because your trust deficit is so high or your trust
Yeah.
score is so low that they consider the source. And they're like, no, this guy doesn't recognize when I do well. He may be aware
Yeah.
of it, but and what's even worse, a guy once told me, I know why I don't get positive feedback because my boss sees me doing it and he doesn't want to tell me.
Oh,
I had never thought of it that way,
I've
Sarah.
never
I
thought of
had
that
always
either, right?
thought, oh, they don't really know. Well, part of the reason they don't really know is they're not looking for it,
Right.
right? And that's a huge mind shift for a lot of managers.
Yeah.
If you go out looking for negatives, you will
You're gonna
find
find
them.
them. Hmm.
And if you go out looking for positives, you will find them. Okay? It's
Hmm.
called the reticular activating system. The things you're looking for will appear. But if you're not looking for it, if you're not looking
Yep.
for positives, you won't see them. And if you're looking for negatives, you're going to see them. And if you haven't
Hmm.
built up trust, you're going to get defensiveness and pushback. Yeah.
Exactly. And even worse, if you have built trust through, hopefully, manager tools one-on-ones,
Right.
and then all you do is lean into negative feedback, you're going to be burning down
Yep.
every ounce of the goodwill that you've built up, all that hard work that you put into manager tools one-on-ones, thrown
Yeah.
into the complete trash because you
And
just
here's
ruined it.
here's another great anecdote. I was talking to a guy once and we finished one-on-ones. He said, "This is great. I get the idea of
Mhm.
trust. I've never trusted my bosses." And I thought this was really
Sounds right.
I had never heard it said this simply before, and I should have, but I maybe I did, but I don't remember it. He said, "I get it. You want to build up trust. And I want to be able to trust my boss. And I also want my directs to trust me."
Hmm.
And then he said, and I assumed this is we're going to talk about feedback next, Mark, right, Mark? And I said, yeah, feedback is next. It's great. You're going to love it. It's really simple. And he said, and we're doing this trust so we can give them negative feedback. So as we take away as we take away the trust by giving him negative feedback, we'll have built it up enough that it won't be too bad. I mean,
Oh,
my mouth just hung
yeah.
open. I went, oh no, no, you
Yeah.
really wait, just wait. I promise you, wait until we go through the feedback section here
Yeah.
for a couple of hours and I teach you how to do it and
Right.
why to do it and what the principles are. I
Yeah.
was flummoxed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm rarely speechless, but I was speechless. Like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh. And then I thought, how many other people who have been to our
I've thought
trainings, the
this.
hundreds of thousands of
Yeah.
managers over the years have been, and they thought, oh, we're building up trust so we can give negative
Yeah.
feedback.
Exactly.
No,
Yeah,
dude.
no,
Yeah,
that's not the
yeah.
reason, folks. We do not build trust through one-on-ones, just simply so that we can make at regular intervals withdrawals from this trust account, if you will,
Yeah,
using negative feedback. We build up the trust with full intentions that we will continue to add to the trust and keep it at a high level of trust. It's not just that
absolutely.
we result in like a neutral situation again.
Yeah,
It's not to get
yeah,
neutral.
yeah.
No,
We're gonna
no.
spend. We're gonna make deposits and then withdrawals.
Yeah.
Deposits and withdrawals. Yeah. Look, if you're going to be a fair and honest manager, folks, the only way to get to negative feedback is to not only build up trust through one-on-ones, but
Hmm.
also to show that you're aware of both your directs wins and
Yeah.
losses. Okay? You have to give positive feedback to show that you're an ethical manager, which then gives you the license with a high trust score as well to then give negative feedback. And then what you'll discover is when you've done one-on-ones and positive feedback, there won't be the defensiveness and pushback. In fact, I tell every group I train, once we get through the positive feedback part of rolling out the Trinity, I say, when you start giving positive feedback, I promise you, at least half of you in this room, before you get to the time where you're starting to give negative, in other words, using our model to deliver negative feedback, you're better. Many of your directs, the top, let's say the top half, your higher performers, of your directs, will ask you for negative feedback even before it's time. And by the way, you should say no and say, no, I'd like to wait. Let me just get really good at this feedback model here, more and more positive feedback. And some people, the best performers, will be like, the high Ds particularly, will say, no, 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 I don't want to hear about how good I'm doing. And you should just go right to negative. Or I want more negative. Imagine a world where not only were your directs not defensive and didn't push back, but they came to you and said, hey, I'd want more positive feedback. They might as well take up a sign and walk around the office saying, I trust my boss.
Yeah.
Right? That would be, imagine that. That would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it, folks. If you want negative feedback to be received, accepted by your directs professionally, without drama or defensiveness or pushback, you've got to give tons of positive feedback first. And it's inconvenient and you may not like it, but having measured over 975,000 managers and their behaviors, we can tell you firsthand that's how you have to do it. You can, let's be clear, do it any way you want, but there's only one way we've ever been able to find that works in the long run. One-on-ones, then positive feedback, and then, and only then, negative feedback.
Yep. That's it. Good. Okay. Next is previous boss effect.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Every one of your directs brings to their relationship with you all their previous relationships with all their previous bosses. I talk to managers sometimes, Sarah, and they say to me, I really don't like new, inexperienced people coming, fresh college graduates, fresh high school graduates, because they just ask the dumbest questions. They just have no idea. I say, you know what? I tell some of them when I'm in an argumentative mood, I say, you know what? I actually like them. They're fresh, they're new. We can put the right imprints on them. And actually, the ones that are harder are the ones that have been managed by another crappy manager for 5 previous years. And they come in with this crust around them, this spiky armor of defensiveness. They know, oh, you're going to be another one that just gives me negative feedback.
Here we go again.
So they start with an even, at least new people start in with 0, maybe slightly negative because you're the boss. But if they've had a boss for 5 years and that boss hasn't been good, their negative trust score is even higher. So, you know, and as we said before, what's a reasonable assumption about those previous bosses? They were horrible.
Yeah.
You're the next person in line. And again, they're right based on their previous experience to assume you'll be just like their previous bosses. That may be one of the most inarguable things about managing, because one person almost never gets to work for only one boss for his or her entire career. So they bring their bad lessons with them.
Yeah, exactly. Those bad lessons looked like a boss that didn't do one-on-ones, that didn't give positive feedback, that only gave negative feedback, which, let's face it, she called feedback because she thought there wasn't an option.
Exactly.
When she gave negative feedback, she made it serious. Right? Come to my office.
Joey,
close the door. Right? Exactly. It was a conversation about an issue that needed to be resolved. It was this dark and dramatic thing that drained all life force out of every direct who ever received it.
Yeah.
And people sought to avoid these conversations because they weren't meant to help. They were meant to make me feel bad.
Why wouldn't our directs be wary of feedback? Because they think it's negative only, right? They should be. They're intelligent. They've learned that feedback is a low trust gotcha game.
Yeah, this isn't their first day.
When a manager tools manager starts the process, your directs are going to be defensive. And we as managers have to fight through that. We'll talk more about that in a little bit with briefings. and one-on-ones and positive
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Which takes us actually beautifully, Mark, into the lack of a briefing.
Yep.
Now, folks, one of the things that we recommend that all managers do is brief before they change. We, in fact, have an entire podcast called Brief Before You Change. And we've said many times, never introduce a change to how you manage people without first taking the time to introduce that change before you actually make it. And this is why. In our teaching and coaching of rolling out the manager tools trinity, one-on-ones, feedback, coaching, delegation, every new tool gets an introduction as part of the rollout. That is, you introduce the concept of one-on-ones before you actually do a one-on-one. You answer the questions that all the people on your team have about
Yeah.
one-on-ones before they start to receive one-on-ones. You, in turn, introduce the feedback model before you start doing the feedback model. You again answer their questions before they're expected to receive. You introduce the coaching model before you start using it. You take questions. You can see the theme here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And again,
Mhm.
why do we recommend this? Because we tried having managers simply start using the tools
Mhm.
even after we spread them apart and said do one-on-ones first and then feedback and then coaching and so on. And there was pushback and defensiveness with every new tool because directs didn't know what was happening
Yeah.
and didn't know how their manager wanted them to respond. And so they pushed back. They were
Mhm.
uncomfortable. You're doing something new. I wasn't read into it. What's my part in this little play we're doing here?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Folks, if you don't tell them why you're changing your behavior, you're leaving it to them to make up the reason why you've changed your behavior. And
And it
let's
just occurred to
imagine,
me
yeah,
that you said that. It just occurred to me. What reason will they default to? What their previous bosses did.
right,
They will guess,
exactly.
why would my previous bosses, the crappy ones, did?
Oh,
Oh, and so they will
this isn't
they will
good.
import they will impart
Yeah,
to you nefarious
yeah,
motivations.
exactly.
Oof, I didn't think of it that
Exactly.
way.
They
Yeah.
assume malicious intent, like
Yeah.
basically because they're like all the other human beings on the planet Earth. They just assume malicious intent. They think they're in trouble. They think, oh my gosh, who screwed up? Why am
Yeah.
I being cast with this same brush? I was doing fine, but now it seems like we're all getting punished for it. If they think they're being punished, they're going to react as though they're being punished.
No surprise. Yeah. Now,
Exactly.
our data, when we say we got data that said directs push back, directs
Hmm.
actually commented and managers said, yeah, I did 6 feedbacks and 3 times I got pushback or whatever.
Hmm.
The data don't say why they resisted. Data never do that. But in a way, frankly, we don't care. The data tell us that when managers try to change the way they manage their directs without explaining the what and the why and the how, directs resist,
Yep.
lacking an understanding of what effective managers do and why
Hmm.
they do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's exactly it, folks. I'm going to say it again because I want to make sure we're perfectly clear on this
Yeah.
point. Never introduce a change to how you manage people without first taking the time to introduce the change before you actually make it.
Yep.
Go back to the middleman test that Mark was talking about earlier. You're the direct in this case. Put those shoes on for a minute. Wouldn't you want your boss to tell you what new things they're going to do and how they're going to do them and why they're going to do them? Remember
Yeah.
that your directs, in this case, are learning right alongside you. And this will help both of you learn faster. And the pushback and the defensiveness will be vastly decreased and
Yeah.
disappear much more quickly than if you try
And we
and
guarantee
slide it
that.
in naturally.
We guarantee it. The pushback
Hmm.
and defensiveness will virtually disappear. There's
Yeah.
always one who's
Yeah.
just ornery, and that's okay.
Yeah.
They
They had a
come to
bigger
work
crust than
ornery
the
every day.
others, a
Yeah,
thicker
exactly.
crust.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Now look, many managers don't want to announce. They're afraid that if they do announce what they're doing, they won't be able to stop because a briefing implies a commitment. So to be clear,
Hmm.
folks, we respect the fact that you're saying, "Ooh, I don't want to brief. I just kind of want to slide it in there and see how
Yeah.
it works." Okay.
Yeah.
But if you slide it in there to see how it works and they don't know how to respond, they'll respond defensively because of your role power, even if your
Hmm.
trust score is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Um, so there's risk here.
Hmm.
But look, guys, we all know there's no rewards without some risk.
Hmm. Exactly. I call that the
Yeah.
diet rule, Mark.
Oh,
I mean,
I don't know this rule.
if you go on a diet and you don't tell any of your friends, you can
Oh,
still order French fries when you go for lunch with them. But if you
it's
tell all your
good.
friends that you're on a diet,
Yeah.
and then when you're out for lunch with them, then if you try and order fries, someone's going to call you on it. So you're
Yeah.
probably not going to order fries. You're going to
Right.
get a salad.
Yeah.
So it's
Well,
easier to diet if you don't tell anybody.
I'm reading a
The
book right
diet
now called
rule.
The Success Principles. It's one of those old books that sells millions every year, and it's a fabulous book. And it talks about being clear about what you want and planning
Mhm.
for it and making it happen. And one of the things he says is, if you take a group, several groups of people, and you ask them, this group, you tell, just write down your goals. This group, write down your goals. No, no, no. The first group is just have goals. Okay. The next group has to write them down. The next group
Mhm.
has to display them. The next group
Yep.
has to display them and tell their friends.
Uh-huh.
And it is the big increase in goal
Yeah.
achievement
Tell your
is when they
friends.
tell their friends, because they're
Exactly.
going to be guardrails for you, helping you to get where you need to be.
Yeah.
And look,
Exactly.
if you don't brief, you're just like
Yeah.
the previous bosses of your
Mhm.
directs. That cues your directs when you start something new, something unbriefed, that they should push back, hoping
Mhm.
that you'll go back to the old way.
Yeah. And you might
Yeah,
flavor of the
yeah,
month.
exactly. Yeah, briefing ups the stakes, but it
Hmm.
reduces the chances that you will be a flavor of the month. And flavor of the month is a self licking ice cream cone in a negative way. You try something, they push back because they know they don't want you to continue doing it because they want their world not to change. They don't like people with role power over them changing their environment. They want things generally to stay the same. And so they push back. And so you drop back. And then you try again and they push back. And then
Hmm.
you hear flavor of the month from the
Yeah.
directs, when in fact they want flavor of the month, meaning they can
Yeah.
make you go away. That's
Exactly.
the secret nasty message of flavor of the month.
Hmm.
And then you're
Hmm.
stuck quitting and just being like all the other bad managers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So that takes us to our last section, lack of practice. Now, folks, let's face it, to get good at something, you have to practice doing that thing. The beauty of being a human being is we're all capable of doing virtually anything. But that wide ability to do virtually anything comes with a cost. That
Yeah.
cost is you really suck at everything when you first start doing it.
Yes, that's the
You
human
do. You're
condition. Yeah.
terrible. Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to go over what we over here at Manager Tools call the Maguire hump of the horseman curve. You can't just do the things the same way and magically drive down the cost of work and increase the cost of
Nope.
productivity. Or you can't. It doesn't work that way. Or you can try it and you might get some productivity gains, but it's going to take too long to make a difference.
Yes, with the kind
Mhm.
of op tempo that organizations have today, you can't afford to just gradually get a little bit more efficient with your job every
Yeah.
day and then magically become a
Yeah.
manager that gets promoted. If you want to make meaningful change, you have to change what you do and not just hope for
Yeah.
greater efficiencies leading to that greater effectiveness, a long, slow line, like a 1 degree slope out to the right, measuring productivity or measuring effect the work you have to put in order to get to your level of effect, the necessary level of effectiveness. You have to try
Hmm.
something you're not going to be immediately good at.
Hmm.
This is one of the
Hmm.
tenets of being a professional, learning to do things differently and better and fighting through the discomfort of
Hmm.
learning something and, as Sarah said, sucking at it. And so you can get better. And when you do things differently, you're just not going to be
Yeah.
good at it. And it's okay to not be good at it
Mhm.
in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really hard thing for many managers
Yes,
to live with, to deal with, folks. You're insecure, right? We're afraid of making mistakes in front of our directs.
that's a big
But
one. I agree.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But there's a big lesson here. Doing things differently in the pursuit of excellence and doing them poorly initially is not making a mistake. It's not a sign of weakness to struggle to get better. The true sign of weakness, folks, is just not trying.
You know, I write all of our podcasts, career manager tools and executive tools. I edit career tools. And there are very few times that I put something in bold. But that sentence you said there, that one isn't in bold. Okay. Doing things differently in the pursuit of excellence and doing them poorly initially is not making a mistake. It is not a sign of weakness to struggle to get better. The true sign of weakness is not trying. So
Yeah.
good.
Mhm.
So that's why in the Manager Tools rollout, we recommend you, after you've done 12 weeks of one-on-ones, building trust, building trust, building trust, we recommend you give only positive feedback for the first 8 weeks after you introduce the feedback model to your
Mhm.
directs. This is to let you practice with the model and get good at it before you start using it for negative feedback.
Mhm. Exactly. But again, the larger lesson is if you want to be effective, there are things and no, I'm sorry, Paul. I'm going to do that one again. But again, the larger lesson here is if you want to be a professional, effective manager and you think there are things you can do better, you're going to have to take the risks of doing things a little bit differently and knowing you're not going to be good at them. Don't
Yes.
worry that you're not good. Of course, you're not good. You've never done this before. Sure, maybe they'll rib you a little bit. They might
Yes.
tease you a little bit. You might even get a little bit of pushback. Though pushback about positive feedback is
That is
exceptionally
absolutely rare.
rare,
Yeah.
exceptionally. But worry about that without trying new things and stumbling in the beginning. You'll never get better if you don't
Never.
try,
Yeah.
ever.
Keep swinging.
Yeah.
Okay. You want me to summarize?
Yeah, wrap it up.
Sure. Delivering negative feedback is hard, folks. We know it. It's especially hard if you haven't done it, and even harder if you haven't experienced it from a boss who is a Manager Tools manager or someone else who's happened to stumble on a way to do it in a way. As somebody once said, the ability of a manager, the really great managers know how to step on your shoes and still leave a shine.
Hmm.
There's low trust. You didn't like it when your boss gave it to you. You've tried before and failed, and that's okay. There's not enough corresponding positive feedback. Your direct's previous bosses were horrible at giving feedback. Your directs didn't like that any more than you did.
Hmm.
And too many managers don't get briefed in advance, or too many managers don't give briefings in advance,
Hmm.
or have enough practice to get good at it before they quit. But all of these can and should be overcome. Build trust through one-on-ones first. Brief your people. That's what you would want. Be candid that you're new and won't be perfect at it right away, any more than anyone else is really good at something right away. Don't overreact to pushback. Your directs have plenty of bad experiences themselves. They're not attacking you, they're responding from their lived experience. Okay? And accept that kind of pushback as the cost of change and getting better. And as the famous TV spokesperson once said about eating oatmeal, it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Mark. That was great.
Oh, my pleasure, Sarah. That was a lot of
Mm.
fun. I don't. It's 20 years, and we
Yeah.
hadn't done that cast. I don't know how.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
there's so much more to mine in all of our guidance. Yeah.
Mm. I love it. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.